I'll be recording this event. I would ask that nobody else audio or video record this. We're real sensitive about putting things out on the internet because this is a free-ish event. You had to pay $1 to get in, so we got a card capture on you. But we just ask that you don't kind of share this around. The panelists will review the recording at the conclusion of this and kind of make an assessment of what we're going to do with it afterwards. But a lot of it's going to depend on what kind of areas that we get into, if that makes sense. The general format for this board is, okay, I've just done the rules. Then I'm going to go into the introductions of the panelists. Then we're going to have Pastor John Mark lead us in the invocation, and then we're going to start up discussion topics. This is going to be a little bit of a free-flowing conversation that will kind of condense towards the end into a format. So without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and start introducing the panelists as I see them on the video screen here, starting with Mr. Reagan Cole here. Why don't you tell us about yourself and your company and your beard?
I had to go with the beard. Hey guys, my name's Reagan Cole. My company is Texas Defense Articulations. I know it's a mouthful. I apologize. Didn't think that one through. I've been in business teaching firearms instruction to the community and pretty much everyone in Texas that will come to me for the last 6 years. Certified by the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement as a firearms instructor, Texas A&M Engineering Extension Service, Department of Public Safety. The list goes on and on and on. I've also studied as an instructor under Eric of Green Eye there, and Paul Howe, Combat Shooting and Tactics, just a few of the guys that I do a lot of work with. But for the last few years, I've always offered to churches a free consultation for just me to come talk to them, because a lot of them have thought about this long before this incident occurred, just because of other things that have been happening in the world. And so I always like to get out there and at least give them my information, and if they don't like me, give them someone else to go to. But I basically offer the firearms training for anybody on the good guy side. So I'll leave it at that. We'll go on to the next guy.
Thanks. Matt and Carol, we got two here to introduce.
Okay, I'm Matt Wilson, retired a little over 2 years ago. Took my special skill sets that I learned when I was over at the unit as direct support guy, both a heavy breacher and also covert methods of entry. I still work with the Department of Defense, I work with the law enforcement, emergency services, help them with their entry training. I also still contract teaching shooting, CQB, do a lot of vulnerability assessments. I work with Carol Winsinger on those. I handle majority of the interior. She handles the exterior. So that's pretty much a little bit about me. Carol?
I'm Carol Winsinger. My company is Scenic 360. I have a degree in landscape architecture, 22 years of experience with commercial and residential landscape design and install. My company specializes in landscape design with a focus on security in the landscape. We perform vulnerability assessments on the exteriors of residential and commercial buildings. We move from the property line inward to the exterior walls of the building, look for any vulnerable entry points on the property and the site, and make recommendations based on those findings. With my landscape background, basically I focus on the use of natural material to create those barriers and deter intruders, entering properties, and that type of thing. And then we also manage the implementation of the vulnerability assessments that we do.
Appreciate it, Carol. I'm actually really excited to hear some of your viewpoints on some of these things.
Thanks.
Matt? Oh, we did Matt. Let's go to Don Oxman.
Thanks, Eric. My name's Don Oxman. I have a IT security business here in Fort Worth, Texas, called the Oxman Group. I've about 20 years of experience in the IT security industry. Former Army Intel guy as well. So whereas Matt and Carol do a lot of the physical security assessments and things like that, I do assessments on the IT infrastructure side. So whether it's websites or other types of penetration tests, things like that is what I focus on.
Thanks, Don. Monty, I haven't seen you in a while, so I'm happy to see you here.
Yeah, happy to see you too. My name is Monty Leha, retired from the Army, Special Forces medic, special mission unit medic for a long time, a number of deployments. I work with Quiet Professional Group, and we're a group of Tier 1 medics, and currently we provide training to USASOC, and it looks like we're going to, and it's medical training, so tactical medical training going into prolonged field care and some other stuff. So a lot of advanced medicine as far as the Army goes. But I also provide pretty much free consultation here in the state of Arizona to churches, schools, law enforcement. I'm on a state initiative right now to provide stop the bleed training for the whole state. And we're coming up with a medical training and outfitting kits and other things for schools and government agencies. So that's kind of, I'm totally involved in all the tech med side. I mean, I do some tactical training, but that's kind of my niche in the market.
Awesome. Thanks, Monty. And now let's head down here to Mr. Walker. Now, Mr. Walker was a late ad. We kind of had the good idea fairy hit yesterday, and Reagan tracked down some contacts because I started getting a lot of legal question emails leading up to this. So I was like, well, we might want to bring in an expert on this expert panel. So, Mr. Walker.
Hello. Well, it's good to join you. My name's Edwin Walker. I know it shows up as Thomas. That's my first name. So I'm one of the principal program attorneys with Texas and U.S. Law Shield, and we provide legal representation for our members in the event that they have a use of force or deadly force situation. And for several years now, not just as a result of what has recently happened, not as a result of the change in Texas law, but for several years, we have been advising churches as organizations and church members as just regular folks about what are the legal ramifications about not only carrying in church, but using force and deadly force in those kind of church attack situations.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Hey, I'm really glad to have you on here, and I appreciate you coming out.
Sure.
And now, finally, last but not least, I'd like to introduce the pastor to my church, and a guy who's had a great role in my spiritual and personal development. And I'll be seeing him here shortly tomorrow morning for the Bible study he leads at the church at 6 a.m. So if you're in the McKinney area, feel free to turn up for that. So, Pastor John Mark.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it. And thanks for letting me be a part of being pastor at Cottonwood for 22 and a half years. And certainly as a pastor, this is always in the back of your mind, these type situations and concern for the sheep. But there are certain incidences, and certainly the one recently in Texas bring this to the forefront even more so. It's interesting as I've talked to pastors across the nation, their feelings have changed, many of them recently. I just heard that the Catholic diocese here in Dallas just made a change from being a gun-free zone to allowing people to carry. So this is certainly a poignant topic, and I appreciate all the expertise here. Let's pray and open. God, we just ask your blessing on this time and your wisdom here. God, as a pastor, I would rather not be talking about this. I would rather not be concerned that these type incidences might happen in my church or anybody's church. But the reality is we live in a sinful world, God. And as such, we are called to be protectors of those who are innocent and those we love and those we care for. And so, God, I just pray that everything that's shared tonight via this webinar, would just bring more and more wisdom and more clarity how churches need to act and respond in the days ahead as sin just becomes more and more prevalent. Darkness so many times just seems to overwhelm light, but the truth of the gospel is always going to win out. And thank you for that, God. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you very much for that, Pastor. Appreciate your time here. All right, so we'll go ahead and kick this off. A good segue from Pastor's invocation there. I'd like to direct this to Reagan first. Okay. Due to current events, there's a number of outfits marketing active shooter training for churches. Also, churches by themselves are approaching training companies for this specific training. I know I've been one of them. Do you think this is a proper focus for them, or are they skipping the basics and misprioritizing needs?
Yes, I do actually believe the active shooter training that's being peddled to most of the churches at the moment is not in their best interest. It's in the best interest of making money. It's what it appears to be to me. It's not the proper focus because conducting active shooter training, what most people believe is simunition, or what most people are referring to as a simunitions course or an airsoft course, where they're using some sort of media that's supposed to be like their gun and engaging other people. And one of the biggest problems that I'm seeing with that is there's, without any previous training whatsoever, it's very counterproductive. From everywhere from, you see mismanaged courses where there's everybody takes their turn playing the good guy and everybody takes their turn playing the bad guy, and that's makes some incredibly terrible training scars in their mind. And then you're also seeing them create tactics based on the capability of the weapon systems that they're using. So, I mean, you can't make a 125-yard shot with a simunitions gun. So it's just not really one of those parameters that people start bringing in. And if you ever shot one, it's like a mortar. It doesn't go out closer to a straight line, which, you know, we all know bullets don't travel in a straight line, but it's a pretty serious handicap that they're working around. Also, people tend to put on, or students, more specifically, students seem to put on artificial speed. Trying to go too fast, taking shots they would never take in real life, and putting that all together in that application whenever they go through a scenario, and either where if they win or if they lose, according to the instructor, they're building in really bad training scars. Think like, oh well, I did pretty good. It's a false sense of security, I guess, is what I see. I'll be like, well, we did pretty well, you know, we did all right. And that's one of the things I've run in with schools. I've been working with schools since they started allowing license to carry on campus. And frankly, one of the first trainings that one of my first schools did, the reason I got called is because they did a force-on-force class with the local PD. And they walked all over the local PD. So there was a bunch of issues that there was no training. It was just simply doing something. And I guess they looked at it as an evaluation, and thank the Lord they looked at it and they were like, wow, we didn't do well. And so we should call a professional. And that's how I got my phone number picked out on that. There's also an issue with objective individual critiques whenever a situation or a scenario is put forth, and then, you know, it's conducted and then you see how everything happened. Well, the instructor can only be in one spot at one time, and, you know, you can have assistant instructors and that sort of thing. There's a whole different rabbit hole associated with that. But being able to say, hey, this is what you did wrong, this is what you did right, and or even just reinforcing, hey, this was correct. But you have so many moving factors and variables in there, it's almost impossible to get good solid critique, especially even on the fundamentals of using a firearm. And we're seeing, you know, without the fundamentals, there's no reason to start trying to put on speed and start trying to throw in thought process without actually talking about thought process. And that sort of thing. So let's see, I actually had a note on this, but typically what we're seeing is students will shoot faster than they can think. And especially in a crowded area such as a church, that's what we're seeing, is a shooter in a crowded area. If you try and shoot faster than you think, it's a recipe for failure and a lot of unnecessary deaths or medical issues. So, and to be clear, I'm not against simunitions training or anything like that. I'm against its improper use. And you're seeing these really expensive courses being pitched to these churches, and frankly, without good solid training ahead of time, it's very counterproductive. It's not worth your money. But that type of training does have its place. I personally won't offer for schools that I train with. They train 2 days a year. I won't do anything associated with force on force until they've completed at least 2 2-day courses. So that's my own personal preference on it. Somebody else may have some other ideas.
I take the same standpoint. I actually refuse to teach CQB to any SWAT team unless we do live fire first. We'll do simunitions. So, Matt, you got any thoughts on this?
I agree with what Reagan was saying. The problem we're having here in Tennessee is that a lot of churches have their own security details, and majority of them are coming from guys that were in the military for about 4 years, 5 years, or guys that retired 20 years ago, and they refuse any outside help. And that's the problem we're running into. They're very stubborn. One of the churches out there has a retired dev group guy. He's been out for quite a while. And the problem is he's doing good. I mean, that's fine. He's got his own security detail, but they need to catch up with the times. They need to work on, just like you said, the basics, the fundamentals, develop at least some kind of gates that they meet certain criteria. Once they meet that criteria, they can advance forward. A lot of them are not. They're just jumping right into it. I stay away from the whole, any kind of simunitions, force on force. I like to work with situations, given situational awareness training. Where's everybody going to be situated in the church? Where do you have them? Because I can go in and start talking about security, and it doesn't meet their requirements because, one, I could be talking completely left field, they're in right field. So it's knowing the client, knowing what they need, and not having a cookie cutter technique about it, but having a bespoke or a custom made class for that client. But yet again, it's getting in with them because they have their own security detail, and they really think they have it made, and they're refusing outside help. So, Carolyn, you have anything?
No, not particular.
That's about what we have on it right now.
Don?
Yeah, I would defer to the other experts on the panel when it comes to this. It's not my area of expertise, but I appreciate the offer.
Yeah, that's no problem. When we go around, if you don't have anything to add, that's totally fine. Monty?
Yeah, I'm just in agreement. I think people think they know. People feel like they do some training and they know what it's like, and it's a very overwhelming situation. And if you're not exposed to it, like he's saying, doing training, doing scenario training, and doing realistic scenario training, not force on force so much, but just some walkthroughs and some talk throughs so that they can think through a situation, what's going on, so they can keep an eye on the bigger picture. Because the reality is, if someone's shooting, there's probably going to be people running all over the place. And if you're the person with that weapon and there's a target there, you need to be able to dial it down so that you can see the big picture, what's going on, and you don't shoot the wrong people. So going back to probably some realistic training and more talk through and walk through anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And the question that we just got in the chat really kind of highlights what happens. And this is why I wanted to lead off with this question, even though it's really more topics that are for later in the seminar. But I wanted to head off with this because this was one of the main reasons that I set this up. Is, guys want to do this entertainment training, this fun stuff, and run around with simunitions, and they want to get to the collective tasks. They want to get to the end state without putting in time to the fundamentals. And I'll take any guy who can handle his weapon safely and competently, play shots accurately and consistently, and can target discriminate over a guy who's done 1,000 hours in a shoot house with nothing but simunitions any day of the week. It's the fundamentals that make you good. Simunitions has its place. Force on force has its place, but you're not running around with simunitions guns in real life. You're running around with real guns. And that's what you got to train with, if that's what you're doing, if that makes sense.
And if you're doing simunitions, you really have to have the people disciplined to do the right thing. With simunitions, they've turned it into a paintball, and they take risks that they never would take if it was live rounds, people wouldn't be running around like they would be. They'd be hunkering down, figuring out what the heck's going on. But when they do simunitions, they like to run around and be heroes, and that's not really how it works.
Yeah, marksmanship too. You guys moving at unreasonable speeds for sure. All right, so we'll probably circle back to this a little bit later, but I wanted to bring in some of the other panelists and kind of hop back up to the general orientation after we've kind of gotten that Band-Aid ripped off. Wanted to talk about the thought of gun-free zones. So Pastor John Mark just mentioned that the Catholic diocese, has reversed their course on that. But I kind of wanted to get some thoughts on, what people think about gun-free zones, because this is a big thing going around in not just the church community, but a lot of communities. Matter of fact, the church I was baptized in Yorktown, Virginia, the pastor actually removed my advertisement for this on their group page. So I'm going to dime him out right now. He gave a sermon 2 Sundays ago, and it was all about banning guns, nothing about any kind of planning, which what we're going to talk about. So, and I think what it is, it's people's fears, what they're getting at. So I kind of wanted to get some thoughts about that, and I'd like to start with Pastor John Mark. If you're still here, what are your thoughts on gun-free zones? Am I going to be coming to your church in the future, or am I got to find somewhere else to go?
Yeah, I'll just give you my thoughts. I've never been an advocate for a church being a gun-free zone. It's just not a reality of the world that we live in. And so it's just a feeling we've had. Our senior staff is in agreement on that if somebody's trained and equipped and has ability and the right license to carry a gun, there's no reason they should not be able to bring it into a church. That's just our stance and my feeling.
I appreciate that. And your audio was coming in just a little bit broken, but I was able to understand you there.
Ironically, it sounded very demonic.
Yeah. Well, now that you keyed up, you were the next guy I wanted to go to, Mr. Walker, on this. What are your thoughts here?
Well, obviously, we're against. We don't think any place ought to be a gun-free zone. And here in Texas, churches actually kind of hold a very unique position because churches were on the list of the original gun-free zones whenever Texas passed their original concealed handgun law. And then 2 years later, the legislature realized, hey, it's not really right. It's not really our place to tell private property owners whether or not they should or should not be gun-free zones. And so they revised Texas law to basically give churches, along with amusement parks and hospitals and nursing homes, the ability to declare themselves as to whether or not they wanted to allow handguns or prohibit handguns from their premises. And fortunately, I would have to say, I think the majority of churches have taken a don't ask, don't tell kind of policy, and they have not gone out of their way to actively prohibit handgun holders, licensed handgun holders, from bringing their guns into churches. And so, I think here in Texas, we're sort of known for having a different mentality when it comes to firearms. But with regard to churches, it really does. I understand that, philosophically and theologically, people want to say, oh, blessed are the peacemakers, and, we don't want guns. We don't want people to feel like this is a hostile environment. But they fail to realize that, it's not really the folks inside the church that you have to worry about. It's the folks who are outside the church. And so why do you want to set yourself up? Why do you want to teach your congregation? Because I think that the God-given right to self-defense is just as important as any kind of theological argument that that churches should be a gun-free or a weapon-free area. I don't really think that has any merit. And the folks, unfortunately, church leaders that believe that, I think I don't know. I think that that they fail to acknowledge the cold realities of the world.
Yeah. Pastor John Mark, you still with us? Did you reconnect?
Yes, I did reconnect. I'm here.
Okay, perfect.
Were you able to understand what I said earlier?
Yes, you sounded like a demon, but it was all right. But great segue there. Mr. Walker brought up theology, and I try to study Scripture as much as I can, and I haven't been able to find any scriptural basis for owning a gun being immoral, carrying firearms in self-defense being immoral, or even having firearms in church being immoral. Do you have any differing view on that from a scriptural basis or a theological basis?
I do not at all, Eric. We, hopefully are able to understand, or we've had numerous conversations as a staff about my personal belief. I don't think there's anywhere in Scripture that prevents us from owning guns. I certainly don't believe there's anything in Scripture that would prevent us from allowing guns in the worship center. There is a reality that none of us wish we had to be here. The truth is, I don't want to have this conversation. I don't want to have this worry, but we live in a world that is filled with sin and evil people. And as such, I also believe that as a leader of a congregation, that part of my job is to do everything I can to protect my congregation within reason. So I don't see any theological reason not to own a gun, to carry a gun, or even to allow one in a house of worship.
Thank you.
I'm just, as a side note, I'm a member of the Church of Christ, and the only thing we keep out are musical instruments. So
I'm just a member of the church. All right. Anyone else here on the panel want to add to the theological side or the gun-free zone side?
Well, man, it's like one of the other guys said, it's just, or actually you said it, right? Fear. That's really all I can see when I see those signs. When I see them on a private business, I see fear and them telling me that they don't want my money, which is cool with me at that point. But when it comes to the church, it's like, that's all that I can really grasp. And without getting into a crazy, just scriptural, just constant argument, I will say, like, if I'm correct, the Israelis or the Jews are God's chosen people. And if we'll notice, they have to use firearms and protection every single day, or they will be annihilated off the face of the planet. That's just the threat that they face. So I kind of like throw it out there. Like when I get that question a lot, like, hey, it's supposed to be, blessed are the peacemakers, as Thomas was saying, or I'm sorry, Edwin was saying. But that's one of those things. I'm like, yes, it's peacemakers, but there's also, he who hath no sword, sell his garment and buy one. But I understand there's a lot of scriptures that can be interpreted a couple different ways. That's my 2 cents on that the gun-free zone idea.
Yeah, I agree, and I would encourage people, to actually read Scripture. We're in a church seminar, for church security. If you're having issues with a group that you're at, or the leadership, dig into the Bible. I think you'll be surprised at what you read there. If you haven't looked into it, you've got the flexibility to defend yourself and do things like that.
Hey, Eric, if I can add to that, the reality is that the gun-free zones, only law-abiding citizens are the ones that follow the law and follow those signs. So, a person intent on committing a crime isn't going to pay any attention at all to a gun-free zone, right? So, there's a certain practicality to the gun-free zones. You're handicapping law-abiding citizens and their ability to protect themselves.
Yeah, and to be fair, I'm a strict constructionist when it comes to Scripture. I'm also a strict constructionist when it comes to the Constitution. So I fully support people's rights to dictate how they operate their own businesses. And churches, the way they're set up, they are set up as a business. It's a private place. You can run it as you see fit. So we're offering opinions and advice from our standpoint, but obviously you're free to make your own choices here in this world as well. Yeah, send it.
I'm sorry. I've got one other thing. If they're going to have a gun-free zone, then they need to go and talk to Monty so they can get some excellent medical training, because they're going to need it if anything happens at their church.
If anyone's alive to plug holes. So, yeah. Monty, you got anything to add to that? Somebody's hot mic in here. There we go. Somebody caught themselves. Monty, did you have anything to add to that? Monty, did you have anything to add to that?
I did not. My phone just shut off, so
no worries, man.
Right back on.
That's cool, man.
So I have no idea.
All right, no worries, man.
I didn't have anything to add to gun-free zone, no.
Okay, perfect. So I wanted I'm going to do one more question to bring in Pastor John Mark, because I think he's only with us for the first 30 minutes. And I kind of want to do this as a framing question, for going forward. Pastor, I view the church's primary role as to train and prepare people to go out into the world and witness and create disciples. And in that, I see that the church is having a responsibility to prepare those people to go out into the world and do those things. And there's obviously references in Scripture where the disciples were passing through dangerous areas, traveling long distances, and things like that. Is that a standpoint that you agree with?
Certainly, I think from a go and make disciples perspective, I think that certainly has to do with sharing the gospel and then training people to grow in their faith, and then to have the ability to make other disciples. If you take it beyond that, for me, and I think in our church, that probably wouldn't be an issue as it relates to gun safety and stuff. And we have men's shoots at our church and stuff like that, where we take guys out and teach them to shoot and train them to shoot. But the reality of it is, I also understand there are certain pastors around the nation that don't have the same congregation and don't live in the same geography that I do. So I also want to be sensitive to those pastors and those church leaders, that some of them might well just have an elder board or some other deacon body that just says that's not what we're going to do. So I think there's got to be some freedom there as well. While in my setting, I see no reason the church couldn't help prepare people to protect themselves. But at the same time, I also understand, other churches and other pastors may not be in the same situation that I'm in.
Thank you. And I'm just trying to frame this for the SMEs. You'd agree that the primary mission of the church is to train people to go out in the world to witness and be disciples, not necessarily for firearms or self-defense or anything like that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. That's the number one objective, and that's where we need to be. That's where we need to be at our best. And if we're going to do any other training, we need to call in the experts, let them do that training.
Perfect. So that kind of frames my next question topic to the SMEs. So based off of that, as instructors, whenever we're approached by clients, we want to have that conversation to figure out what the client's wants and, more importantly, needs are and what end state they're trying to achieve. So hearing that the primary mission of these churches is to prepare individuals or small groups to go out into the world, how would that change your mindset to approaching training priorities or plans based off of that as it goes to individual versus collective, right? Let's start here with Monty.
I'm not understanding your question as far as sending out individuals for them to protect themselves so they would care for themselves.
Yeah, so when you kind of prioritize needs, for training plans, once you kind of hear your client's mission or end state, kind of derive their needs once you hear what they're about. Because a lot of churches right now, they're primarily focused on small group security team. That's it. But we just heard from the pastor here that the primary mission of the church isn't actually internal.
Right.
Of the church. It's to prepare people to go external, either individually or in small groups. So how would that, if any, kind of drive, prioritization of training needs or plans?
I think a training it's a whole different training. It's a whole different training than internally trying to protect the church and what's going on in the church, because and I think a lot more laws will come into play into this as an individual carrying out there trying to protect yourself.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be a lot easier to make a decision if someone's attacking you at the church. It's going to be a different decision if there's something going on and you're out carrying. Because then if you make mistakes and you choose the wrong person, or if that person is not a threat, I think you can get I think if it's legally, you can get a lot more trouble out there carrying a gun, trying to be out there. Then it'd be easier to protect yourself in a church, as I'm saying, as far as decision process and thinking, because you're being attacked. I think if you're out there and about, I think it's a whole different mindset, is all I'm trying to say. It's a different mindset, the way you're thinking and making decisions. Yeah,
it's great. So from a medical perspective, let me try this. Would the basic primary skill progression that you would want to target for somebody with regards to medical training as an individual going out into neighborhoods and things like that, would those skills and layering for that mission be conducive towards performing as a basic responder in critical incidences at churches and structures?
Yes, because the basics is what saves lives. So if you know the basics, if you know how to stop a hemorrhage, you know how to apply some dressings, you know how to do a basic patient assessment, you do that with all your casualties. It doesn't matter if there's 50 or 1, it's the same steps. If you have more, then the prioritization goes in, figuring out who's worse than the other one. Also, if it's a bigger incident, then you need to have a plan on how you're going to move all these people to a location to be evac'd. Because if it's a bigger event, and if it's an active shooter style event, then EMS is not coming in right away to help you out. You're kind of on your own for that first 5, 10, 15 minutes, depending on how long it takes law enforcement to get there and lock it down and then bring in EMS. So it'll be a while before anybody does any treatment. So a bigger event, you got to have a better plan. As an individual, event, if it's just like one person you're out there, you can only carry so much anyways. So just carrying the basics, tourniquet, some field dressing, occlusive dress, something like that. And I would say I would carry that stuff not to save someone else, but I would carry it to save myself.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I'm not injured, then I would use it on someone else. But I'd carry enough kit to save myself. And then if I'm not injured, then I might apply it to someone else. So I just carry enough to save myself. And then if I was in the church, bigger organization, then I'd have a lot more kit to provide more care to more people other than myself.
Great. Thanks for that, Monty. Matt, I saw you nodding and taking notes there. What you got?
Yeah. So to go back to the, disciples pushing people out and all that, I think the biggest thing is preventative, as Carol wrote down, preventative training, and as we see it, situational awareness. Basically, train the individuals. Because if you do, I just saw James Roach here, who empower the individual to succeed. When each individual succeeds, the group collectively succeeds. I agree with him. Train the individual, the group, and then also bring the people in as a group, train them. But if we'll take gun-free zones, or if you can't travel with a weapon, at least train them in situational awareness. What to look for. Identify people as threats, friendly. And then as soon as they, and then be able to put them in either category once they see them, talk to them, or get that feeling. People don't see it that way. I mean, we walk through everyday life looking at people as either threat or friendly until they prove otherwise. Give them the training to be able to handle themselves in different situations. For the people that are going overseas, do missions. Train them on medical training, train them on, identifying individuals threat or friendly. Also identify when they walk into a building, what are they looking for? Where's it ingress, egress routes? Where to sit in a restaurant? Identify all this. This is stuff that they can learn that we take for granted that will help them in different situations. Mm-hmm. Helping them develop a pace plan for when they go, when they're out and about. What happens, give them situations. Say, all right, you go out to a restaurant, this happens. What are you going to do? And 99% of the time, they're not going to know what to do. So I think what we can do is as either individually or collectively, help these people understand that they have options, that because they don't have a weapon, there's other things they could do. Being able, like for a lot of my classes, I teach for self-defense. I don't just teach, I teach stick and knife fighting, but I'm not running around with a knife. I'm not running around with a bamboo, 3-foot pole beating people. Take a pen, take a fork, take whatever, take any everyday objects and use them to be able to protect themselves. That's what some of the things that people need to learn. It's not all about guns. It's other things that are at your disposal. Mm-hmm. So that's all I got for there.
Thanks for that, Reagan.
Yeah, and pertaining to the question, I don't know that it reprioritizes everything, but there's a couple different ways that we talk about it. Going out into neighborhoods and that sort of thing, I'm like, yeah, absolutely. We're focused on let's use the firearms because the best friend in your fight is distance, right? I want to be away from that. However, everybody pretty much said what I was going to say, other than and I think Matthew actually brought it up, the sending people overseas where you're not going to get to take your gun. Absolutely, I wouldn't say we would deprioritize the other training, but situational awareness and using everyday weapons, improvised weapons, because typically those places, especially go over to Africa, you see knives and stuff for sale just like in the street. So being able to utilize those sort of things and the medical training. I mean, I don't know that if you can not take a tourniquet through customs or anything like that. I kind of got my doubts, but just not necessarily deprioritizing the other areas of training, but maybe adding on more hand-to-hand, more of the other improvised weapon usage. So that's pretty much everybody else said what I was thinking beforehand.
Don, what you got, man?
Well, I just wanted to kind of circle back to, I think, the underlying original point of the question, in that, because I work with a lot of businesses, right? I don't necessarily work with a lot of churches per se. I've worked with the church where my wife, her business is located inside of a church, actually, using their commercial kitchen. When it comes to security, I know on the IT side as well as on the physical side, there has to be a plan, and there has to be management and or leadership buy-in into what that plan is and what direction they're going in from a security standpoint. And we're talking about training, and Eric, I've taken your classes. I know Matt. Matt and I've talked quite a bit, and I'm sure Reagan, his classes are the same way, and Monty's would be the same. There has to be a plan. There has to be an end state for that training. So to say, hey, let's take a whole bunch of gun classes, right? Or let's take another type of security class or do some other type of training. We have to have a goal in mind, and that would be one of the things that I think is really important for a church to come up with is, what is the plan? It's great to say, hey, we're going to do a gun class, right? Or we're doing force on force training, or even medical training, right? But what's the end state here? And I think that's something that is really important for everybody to keep in mind.
Yeah, thanks for that. I agree. And one of the reasons I kind of wanted to bring this topic up early is also to head off some other things that I've noticed, with some of the outfits that come in and approach some of these churches trying to sell them the one over the world, in a week courses. And I'm very big on a layered training approach. And I'm a big believer in that it all needs to be driven towards the end state. And the end state can drive prioritization of those tasks. And I'm a believer in always trying to start at the fundamental level, as isolated and sterile as possible for each task, and attempt to focus on them in the order of precedence as they would normally appear in daily time, right? What's the percentage chance of that task happening, and then focusing on those first, instead of these low percentage things that have a small chance, but you're going to focus the majority of your training time on them, as opposed to the thing that you do every day. If that kind of makes sense. That's my thought on it, and that's one of the reasons I like going around the horn here, because as I've told the audience earlier, we didn't coordinate any of this, so I kind of wanted to hear their thoughts, and if you just tried to call me, I'm not answering my phone right now, so you'll have to send me a text message or something like that. All right, I want to kind of switch gears here to bring in a couple of our other board members. John Mark, are you still with us? He may have bounced out.
I'm still here. I'm still here, Eric.
Okay, perfect.
I'm still here. Had to get it off mute.
Okay, I don't know if you were sleeping like I do during your sermons.
I've noticed that.
I don't do that. How would you advise approaching a congregation member or church management that may have objections to security or safety programs?
Now, are you talking about from if I was a pastor who had a management team or an elder board that was against it, or are you talking about if I was going to try to sell my services, which are very legitimate services in my mind?
I want to hear this from your standpoint as John Mark, the pastor.
Yeah. Well, if I was going to go and represent myself to a pastor or to a church leader, first of all, I would want them to know that I was looking out for the good of the church. And from my perspective, I'd be very receptive to someone who had, and you've mentioned, a holistic approach all the way from the landscaping all the way inside the building. What's the comprehensive plan? The reality of it is, some people need to be assigned the task of getting people out of the building. It's just that simple. It's not always force on force.
Yeah.
So I would think, to approach, you got to first of all find out if the pastor, if the leadership team is even open to it. You're not going to change their mind. They're either closed to it, they're open to it, or they're in the middle. I think in the middle, that's the category where you spend some time and just walk them through the benefits of having a comprehensive plan of, what are we going to do in a crisis situation? That would just be my initial thought. If you have some more pointed questions, I'm happy to answer them.
No, that's great. I appreciate that. Mr. Walker, what are your thoughts on that? If you're talking to a church, they've brought you in, and there's one or two people in there that are just completely against to it. What kind of approach do you take to that?
Well, obviously, we're respectful of everybody's views, but we do try to convince them that this is one of the unfortunate realities of the world, and they need to be prepared for this thing happening. And I was sort of, I am kind of emboldened by some of the things that you mentioned earlier, because I know the Catholic Church as a whole has been very, very resistant to the whole thing about allowing license holders to carry their handguns in churches. And so to see one of the dioceses turn around on that is kind of refreshing. And I think that unfortunately, obviously, Sutherland Springs, terrible, terrible tragedy, but it really brought home the reality that you don't have to be in an urban setting. You don't have to be a particularly polarizing or high-profile church. It can happen to just your little neighborhood corner church in the smallest, most unassuming, safe, quote-unquote town. And I think that's really, it's unfortunately it took a terrible, terrible tragedy to open a lot of people's eyes, but I think that we're seeing that now.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that. Carol, you kind of deal with security from a little bit of a different aspect with, landscaping. Have you wound up engaging in conversations with any of these entities and kind of picked up a little bit of hostility towards, some of the stuff we're talking about?
Not necessarily from my perspective. I guess I look at what I do as, more on the preventative side of things. So people take that, a little more positively as far as, implementing plants and keeping their homes secure and that type of thing. Not as much into the I guess, guns and firearms and that type of thing. So I think there's probably more resistance there maybe with people in discussing security, but getting into landscapes and using the plantings to create that security in their home, I don't, find a whole lot of resistance there. Sometimes you do have to find other means. Say a family has, they're young children, so you talk about using plants, say with thorns or something like that. They don't want to use, material like that because of possibly being detrimental or harming the children. So you have to find other means to develop there. You can still, work with landscape and use landscapes to kind of direct people certain pathways and that type of thing, and use other means of barriers and walls, fences, that type of thing to also prevent intruders. And then, of course, lighting in the landscape is another item that's critical in helping with security.
Perfect. Yeah, I've definitely got some questions for you when we hit the physical security portion here. So Monty's going to have to head out of here soon. So I'm going to kind of pause where we were and bump up to medical and get a bit more in depth in that. And then we can kind of come back up a little bit. And Lance, we actually did a Bible study on the wall builders that you're posting there at Cottonwood. It's a pretty good one. So, Monty, since you've got to leave here pretty soon, I kind of want to. Could you give us ideas for churches who want to set up comprehensive plans? what priorities would you tell them? Start with this, go to this. What kind of equipment, supplies, training would you recommend churches set up from a medical side, which is often overlooked, and it's very important and often not active shooter, related with a lot of the things that normally happen at churches.
That's true. So I guess a good first aid class would be first in, I would say, for everyday type of medical care. But if we're talking active shooter or a serious incident, it's the basics are going to save lives. And over our time in the military, being in combat, we've kind of figured out what's the right answer over numerous years of doing this. And what we've figured out is, especially in these environments where you won't have a paramedic or you won't have an EMT to come help you initially, it will be time before they come in to help you out. So at that point, you got to save yourself. So the soldier, what we learned is the soldiers have to save themselves first. That's got to happen. So that's tourniquets, pressure dressing, hemostatic dressing, things that are going to stop bleeding, because that's the one thing, once you lose, it's gone. And you're not going to get it back for a while until they get you to a hospital. And you can die from bleeding within 4, 5, 6 minutes. You can be dead from a serious bleeding incident. So that first 5-10 minutes, just hemorrhage control and patient positioning can save someone's life until EMS can get in there and get in some more advanced stuff. So, and I think for the churches is really basic skills and have a plan on what you're gonna do. What are you gonna do with these patients or these people? Are you gonna put them all in one room? Are you gonna put them in one area? Like, where are you gonna put all these casualties? And then how are you gonna apply all these devices? So I would really just work on basic skills, just like shooting, same thing. If they're going to do shooting, they're going to learn how to align the sight, align the sight, trigger squeeze, and focus and hit target, right? That's a basic skill. If you're going to hit the target, that's what you have to be able to do. Align the sight and squeeze the trigger. That's got to happen. Same thing with the basics of saving a life is you have to be able to stop hemorrhage. That's going to save their life, and position patient. So once you get into that point of injury care, then you got to figure out how are you going to evac these people? Because what you find is people are getting evac and they're dragging them out by their arms or their leg, or they're finding doors to put people on to carry them out. So you're going to have to evac these people out to EMS before EMS gets in there. So some type of lightweight litter or something to drag people would be nice. Maybe learning some carries to carry people out, that would be good. So I would say basic hemorrhage control, and then a plan to get them to an ambulance. And then depending on where you live, if you're close to a trauma center and it's an overwhelming event, it might be better for you to just put them in a car and take them to a level 1 trauma center and get them there before EMS can even get them there. And that happened in Las Vegas. People were putting them on trucks and vehicles and taking them to the hospital because EMS wasn't there. So these people had to do all their own evac and all their own treatment. And it's not EMS's fault. It's just they can't go in until it's secure because they're not armed. So it makes no sense to send EMS in. They don't have guns. They can't protect themselves. So they got to wait for things to get secure. So I would really just focus on point of injury care and have a plan on how you're going to get people from when you get their treatments to an ambulance or to the hospital. I would have a plan. And then I would plan on, it's going to be 10 to 15 minutes before anybody comes and helps you. Mm-hmm. So you got to figure that out. You just can't sit there and let people bleed to death. And the other problem is you got to get that training so someone will take action. That's the other problem. If they don't know what to do, they won't do it. But if they train, then they'll do something. But if they're not talking about it and walking through, then they're not going to put a tourniquet on because they're not going to think about it. It's that muscle memory thing. Mm-hmm. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Monty. And before you have to head off, do you offer training to any of these institutions with regards to this, or do you have anyone outfits that you'd recommend?
So to be honest, what I would say is start looking for Stop the Bleed classes to start with. All right, and those are free. If you're paying for a Stop the Bleed class, then I think someone's probably taking advantage of you. All right, so there's free classes out there to learn how to put tourniquets on, how to stop hemorrhage. There's classes out there that they're nationwide. It's a White House initiative, federal government initiative to teach all citizens how to treat a massive hemorrhage. It's there. Now, as far as going beyond that treatment, yes, my group does help as far as getting a little more advanced training and making a plan and figuring out what you guys can do. Yes, we can help you with that. But as far as hemorrhage control goes, there are free classes out there, and every citizen in the United States should know how to stop a bleed at this point. The way things are going, everybody needs to know how to treat a hemorrhage, just like everybody needs to know how to defend themselves and run. You need to know how to save yourself medically and save whoever you're with medically.
I appreciate that. And for everyone listening, the emails for everybody that signed up, I'll be sending a summary email with points of contact. So, if you guys do want to, contact Monty for further advice or training, you guys can hit him up.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for coming.
Yep. Bye.
All right. So bouncing back, because we wanted to get Monty out of here. Let me hop over to Mr. Walker. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you see churches face with regard to safety and security from a legal standpoint?
Well, a lot of churches are concerned with liability. What is their liability in a particular situation? And so we get a lot of questions about that. Are they liable if they allow firearms into their building? Are they liable if they don't allow firearms in their building? And it's kind of interesting. It kind of ties back to what y'all were talking about in the first part about, you want people to train, but you want them to train in the fundamentals, and you don't want them to be reckless. Because there is liability attached to, there's civil liability attached to negligent behavior with a firearm, and there's actually criminal liability attached to reckless behavior with a firearm. And so that's one of their big concerns. And so I think it goes hand in hand with the training because you don't want to, certainly you want people to be able to protect themselves, and they lawfully can do that. And in fact, here in Texas, there's actually a strong argument that somebody would be given a legal presumption that their use of deadly force is reasonable whenever they use it against somebody who has unlawfully and forcefully entered into the church. But that's one of their biggest concerns is liability. And there's certainly, there actually might be some liability attached to that, with regard to folks who are either negligent.
Oh, looks like you. Excellent.
I don't know why that. Somebody just tried to call me. Of course, that would happen while I'm talking. But there is liability. I think with regard to the potential for liability, with regard to somebody who acts negligently, and criminal liability. Of course, that's not really the church's concern, but they, since they're concerned with their parishioners, they don't want them getting into criminal trouble if they behave recklessly. And like I said, with regard to negligence, unfortunately. One of the things you have to worry about is that there's always going to be some sort of plaintiff's lawyer out there who's going to want to feed on this. In fact, I believe I actually heard that there is currently a plaintiff's lawyer who is actually running television advertisement in the San Antonio area right now, soliciting people who are victims of the Sutherland the spring shooting. So I don't know who he intends to go after. I don't know if he intends on going after the family of the shooter who, probably are judgment proof. I don't know if he plans on going after the government, which would not be possible because they have governmental immunity, or whether or not he intends on, concocting some sort of bizarre legal theory to try to think that the church is liable.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I think that most of the church's concerns lie in terms of legal responsibilities.
Awesome. Hey, I appreciate that. And I got 2 more legal follow-up questions for you. First, how I've gotten some questions via email, and I've got some assessments on it myself, but I was interested on what your standpoint was with regards to, and we're to be clear to everyone here, for purposes of this discussion, we're talking about Texas. You're going to want to consult your own state and local laws with regards to some of the legal issues we're talking about. I want to make sure that we're saying that. So then Texas, with regards to 30-06, 30-7, and regular open carry, how does the presence of a daycare on church premises, or separately a school on premises, affect your ability to carry, separately or differently?
Yeah, that's actually a question we get a lot. I mean, after the shooting, our office was deluged, because that's one of the services that Texas Law Shield provides its members. Is not only do they get this quality legal service in the event that they have the government come at them, in a criminal matter or a civil matter, but also Texas Law Shield members can call in and ask our law firm, which we answer all the Law Shield member questions. Pretty much any question with regard to firearms, weapons, self-defense laws, and we'll answer it. And one of the ones that we got asked a whole bunch was the whole issue about carrying in churches and schools, churches that have schools. And it is kind of a complex issue, and the reason is because, as you pointed out, churches, as private property owners, can choose to allow or not allow firearms, specifically handguns, carried by license holders as they see fit. However, schools and educational institutions are on the statutorily prohibited list, which means that the state of Texas has determined that a firearm cannot be brought into the premises of a school or educational institution. Now, one of the interesting things is that daycares are not educational institutions. And that's sort of one of the things that you have to look at. Is it an educational institution that is governed by the Texas Education Code, or is it a daycare that's governed by the Texas Health and Human Services Code? And daycare falls under the Health and Human Services Code, and so it's not a school. But daycare licensing procedures say that they're not supposed to allow firearms onto the premises. And so, whereas the firearm carrier is not in trouble for taking a gun into a daycare, the daycare themselves could stand to lose their license from the Department of Health and Family Services of the state of Texas. So that's one thing that they may want to consider. Now, with regard to Sunday schools, not educational institutions, just a branch of the church. There's no prohibitions there that the church wouldn't be behind. But churches that do have schools that that occupy the premises, basically with regard to that, it's a school when it's a school, and it's a church when it's a church. So if it is one of these situations where it is acting simultaneously, as a building has both a school part and a church part, and they're functioning at the same time, then the law says that a prohibited area is really restricted to the area where the activity is taking place. So you wouldn't want to go participate in any of the school functions while you're there, but you're okay to carry in the church functions. So that's where you have to look at that. Now, one of the kind of interesting little wrinkles to that is I know that there's a lot of churches, particularly the smaller ones, who are just kind of trying to get on their feet and get developed, that actually hold churches on Sundays in school buildings or in buildings that are owned by a school district. And our opinion with regard to that would be that that is a prohibited place because it is owned by a school district. And, there's been certain, the AG has actually released an opinion on this that says that, A school building, if it's owned by a school district, is pretty much a school 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, regardless of the activity that's taking place there. And so you would not want to carry in those places. But other than that, you kind of have to look at the activity that you're attending to determine whether or not you're allowed to carry or not allowed to carry.
Yeah, thanks for that. That was pretty much my thoughts on it too. Usually, when we enter into a church, the first time I went to Cottonwood, I went looking for the business license, or the kids, to see what it was classified as, whether it was a daycare or school. So that's always a concern. And I would imagine that, churches probably don't need to get too scared about the liability of that, because I don't really see our Texas Attorney General too interested in prosecuting church Sunday schools over guns. I don't see that as being a politically viable option for him.
Yeah, and if I could just add something with regard to actually prosecuting a case like that, that sort of crime is very, very, it's very witness motivated. And so unless you have a church or a property owner that is really, really strongly desires to go after a particular individual for having a firearm on their property, as a general matter, no district attorney's office is going to take that case.
Not even Dallas?
Well, I tell you what, North Texas is so bizarre. We have so many weird incidences come out of North Texas. I don't know what they put in the water up in the DFW area. Just for background, I'm here in Houston, and we get some really wacky scenarios out of the Dallas.
Shouldn't profile like that.
It's all the immigrants from the country of California.
Hey, that's profiling.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, thanks for that. So I wanna hop over to physical security here, and I kind of, since we're past an hour right now, I'm gonna kind of condense this to kind of the three SMEs here that we've got, Matt, Carol, and Don for physical security. First, Matt, when it comes to access point control, one of the big concerns with, churches that I talk to is they don't want the church to be a prison. So it's a difficult problem to approach, weighing accessibility versus security. So what are your thoughts on how you would advise a church when approaching access point control, both internally and externally, and weighing those wants to being open and inviting to people, but having some sort of a security posture?
Some of the things I've seen so far with churches is that, one, it's a site that or infrastructure that's been there for quite a while. So they seem to be very antiquated. Some of the ones I've seen. So you need to go talk to the client, work with the client, and see what they have as far as their access points. And from there, talk to them, find out what access points do they allow the churchgoers to come in and leave from. Some churches, they have multiple access points, and they cannot lock those doors due to, maybe there's, somebody who's in a wheelchair, and that's a wheelchair accessible. That's the only one for them. So if they can't change the locks, if they can't bar certain doors, I'd recommend having a person there, some kind of security figure, or having some kind of church detail man those doors, and at the least have some kind of two-way radio or two-way comms that if there is a problem, they can contact the person in charge and go from there. Another one is being able to have some type of PACE plan built in, and when I say PACE plan, I know pretty much we all know your primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency plan for what happens to that access point. If there is a shooting, do we lock that door down and then focus on the other doors? If you can't have that, then maybe have cameras, because there are some churches that have a lot of personnel going there. So have cameras, but you have to have someone or multiple people watching those cameras, because you can't have one person looking at a screen with 6 different entry points. He's not going to be able to catch it. So they're definitely going to have more people dedicated to those screens right there. Locks tend to get funny when you start dealing with access points and everything else, because if you lock one door, then that may totally throw off the flow of people coming and going. So I don't know if that answered the question or.
No, you did. That's great. It's kind of my thoughts too, But Carol, I actually want to save you for last on this, because I really want to. I think you've got an interesting piece here, and I want to give you a chance to kind of cover in depth what you do with regards to this. Don, security versus accessibility.
Yeah, going back to where my wife has her business in that church, and Matt and I actually had some discussions with the church leadership there some months ago. Churches want to stay open and they want to stay accessible to and inviting to everyone, but it kind of defeats the purpose of having increased security. And I know this particular church where she's at, they've had some issues with what we'll call the homeless population. When the church was completely wide open and the doors were unlocked 7 days a week, there was people coming in and out of the church, and there were some problems there. There was some church property was destroyed, and there was one of the custodians was in fact assaulted by one of these individuals. So it is a liability, and to Matt's point, access control, good quality video surveillance, and having additional staff there to really look at people and help kind of herd the masses. And, I was joking about profiling earlier, but, with churches, if regular churchgoers have a certain look and feel and they carry themselves a certain way, and that's not something that necessarily, video surveillance would pick up on that and record it, unless there's somebody there watching it all the time. You need a body there to actually look at it and say, this person doesn't belong here, and we need to do something about it.
Yeah, I agree. I take the same standpoint. Hey, if you can't secure something, you need to observe it. It'd be great if you could do both. If you can't have a automatic locking door, upgraded door with some sort of reinforced frame where it's secure, like your backstage areas and things like that. At a minimum, you've got to have coverage or sensors or an observer or something, hopefully redundant, and we'll probably talk about security cameras here in a little bit, but some of the frame rates that I've seen are pretty shocking. You could probably move from one field of view to the other without actually being caught.
Yeah.
Carol, I'm going to toss this next question to you, because, there's undoubtedly people listening to this who have church leaders that aren't okay with even having a plan. Like I said, the pastor in the church that I was baptized with in Yorktown, he gave a sermon and actually said there's no plan. He's not going to make a plan. And I think you have an interesting take on this with regards to landscaping and how churches can upgrade their physical security posture without being overt. Could you talk to us a little bit about some of the things you do that kind of fulfill this?
Sure. There are several layers really, within the property. Obviously, it depends on, specific property to property. But if you kind of move from, the property lines in towards the building, you can have several layers of security, as I've discussed with landscape material, and trying to make the church or the property not look like a compound or this big security barrier or whatever. Definitely the landscape plantings soften any kind of look as far as fences or walls or any more stiff physical barriers. you can also, in place of, fencing and things like that, you could use large trees for screening. There's several types and varieties that have hollies, for example. Roses also have thorns, or they have prickly leaves, or that type of, physical part about them that would deter intruders or help prevent, intruders from coming into the property. And then as you move in towards the property, you can also use shrubs and plantings to direct pedestrian traffic, and send them in a certain direction so that the path where people are supposed to be moving and going. So those people who are performing the security on the property are watching, and if there's anything out of the norm and people aren't moving in that direction or going that way, then they can set their eye in that direction and know that there's a movement somewhere that's out of place, basically, and they can focus on that and keep an eye on that. Also, just around the building, below windows and stuff, to prevent access by another means versus a doorway. You can use plantings again with thorns, and it's difficult for people to hide behind or in those or access the buildings in that respect. If you have a couple stories to a building, people might try to access the second level. You keep your trees and canopies, trimmed off from the property and back away from the building, so people can't climb and access, at another level. There's a lot of even just basic maintenance, that plans that people can put in place that could help prevent, intruders, keeping landscape at a certain level again, so people can't hide behind, certain items. And then, of course, the lighting is a large factor too, and really keeping areas that could be dark or, where people could hide. If you keep it well lit, obviously, intruder's going to go somewhere where it's dark and they can find a way, and people can't see where they're coming from. Or so lighting's a major factor in keeping a place secure, I believe.
Sure. Yeah, appreciate that, Carol. I think it's really great, and it's something for you guys to all consider. We're broadly covering some of these specific topics because we're trying to get independent opinions. We haven't rehearsed any of this with any of the panelists. So some of the specific question you guys are asking, we'll get to after we get through this stuff. But what she's really talking about is that layered security approach. Where does your security bubble start? It should start as far out as possible. And, the creative landscaping steps that she's talking about can definitely be a value add to, your greeters that are out in the parking lot and things like that, to help steer things into areas of approach that you can observe, control, and things like that in a non-aggressive way, that can still be warm and inviting and, doesn't provide that, kind of standoffish approach that most churches don't want. Now, I want to jump over to Don here because Don is the next guy that's got to bounce out here. So I'm going to ask him a specific question because this is one of my pet peeves when we get into the security camera world. And I kind of talked about frame rate. I've seen some pretty bad things. So I'm going to throw these two questions together and let you run with it. So obviously, you'd have to have a specific look at a structure before deciding where things should be and what's appropriate. But generally, with regard to positioning security cameras and sensors, what do you look for regarding picture quality, capabilities, and positioning and coverage of the cameras? And let me throw the part B at you, the often overlooked positioning of the command center, where the screens are.
Yeah, this I will freely admit, this is an area of expertise that Matt has, I think, more experience in than I do. Here in Texas, you have to be a licensed alarm installer technically in order to do security cameras commercially and sell them to people. If you want to install them yourself, you don't need a license for that. I know from an IT standpoint, there's a lot of cameras that are available now that are wireless, that do not require power because they have batteries. They have the lithium 123 batteries in them, and I use some of those myself. And the frame rates are acceptable, but there's a lot better cameras that are out there. And I would recommend that a church really would find a reputable, licensed installer for the cameras. And Matt can talk more about the positioning and things like that, and ways of providing the best view for those cameras.
Okay. Well, since you don't want to take those, do you want to go down and hit the topics that you wanted to talk about before you got to bounce out?
Yeah, the one thing that's really important, because my focus has been, honestly, in the past 20 years, has been more on the IT side, on IT security. But social media, and I know in our private conversations, I have, my feelings on a lot of social media platforms, but it seems of late that the incidents where there's been mass shootings, right, and we'll call them mass shootings, there were indicators that there was something not quite right. And I'm not being politically correct, so hopefully, bear with me on this one, but there's something not quite right with these people. And it was all readily apparent in social media. So I would say that one thing that a church can do is to look at their church members, their churchgoers, look at those social media accounts, try to have some trusted people within the church friend as many people as possible that are going to the church, and follow them and see, okay, what are people posting on social media? I'm on social media and some platforms and not on others. And, the kids are on different platforms as well. And it may be a case where the adults that are members of the church that are trusted, that are part of the security team or part of church leadership, are friends with the adults as much as possible. And then there's some trusted kids or teenagers that may have gone through some training, and they're friends with other teens or other kids that are also going to that church. And they're able to see what's going on. And if there is something that doesn't look quite right, then they need to raise that issue to somebody else. So in the case of a kid, they're raising it to maybe the church leadership, right, or somebody else in the security team. If it's an adult and there's something that's not quite right going on with a churchgoer, and they're posting it on social media, they may need to escalate that to law enforcement if need be. Yes, that is in essence profiling, but it is effective. And if you can avoid a problem by saying, hey, this person is posting a lot of things that is very suspicious, something needs to be done about that. And that's where, technology these days, we talk about the firearms classes. And of course, I'm a huge fan of that, as I think everybody on the panel knows. But if something can be done to prevent there even being the requirement to use force, that's going to be a better approach.
Yeah, I agree. I appreciate that. And you brought up something that I've got personal feelings about, which is the Texas State Security Commission, which I'll be dead honest, I think it's a joke and it's a waste of time. And it doesn't. I'm not a member of it. I don't want anything to do with it. I appreciate the guys that are out there, but honestly, I just see a lot of fly-by-night companies, coming in and just doing jobs that make no sense. They put command centers, in areas that don't make sense. The frame rates are horrible, coverages are just ridiculous, and they're certified companies. Great, good on you. So I don't know. It is what it is. But, I wanted to do a legal redirect on that, which is one of the questions that I've gotten. So with Mr. Walker, with the recent legislative changes with regards to church security teams, since a security team with within its mission set, part of the job of a security team is to do assessments. It's to assess their environment, to understand how they're going to employ themselves. Would a church security team be possibly running afoul of the Texas State Security Commission, this is in Texas, if they get involved with deciding they need to change camera placements or how they're going to put in security features like that?
I don't believe so. I think that would be a real stretch. I think the legislature has clearly indicated that they don't want, volunteer church security teams to be subject to really any kind of regulation. They just want them to exist. Mm-hmm. And, this problem with regard to thinking that church security teams were, had to be licensed by the Texas Department of Public Safety started 10 years ago with a very poorly written answer to an FAQ that the DPS put on their website, and it caused a lot of confusion. I never had the opinion that they did need to be licensed because they were never employed. I always thought that was the operative word, that as long as you weren't making money from it, as long as you weren't doing it as a job, then you did not have to be licensed as a security guard from the DPS or have any other kind of security, need to abide by any other security regulations. And fortunately, the state of Texas, the Texas legislature cleared that up. It really kind of took me by surprise. I had no idea they were even going to address that issue. It just sort of came out of the blue, and thankfully it did. But, they've cleared it up now to say, look, as long as you're volunteers, and they added a few other things, as long as you don't call yourself security, which is really weird because in the law they said security team, but then they said, oh, by the way, don't call yourself a security team. So as long as you're not getting, as long as you're not getting paid, you're a volunteer, you're not calling yourself security, and you don't dress in a uniform, then I don't think you're subject to any kind of regulation, either by either under the security officer law or the law with regard to being licensed as an alarm company. I don't think you're covered. So the big, and just as an aside, in dealing and talking with a lot of churches, I think sort of their biggest problem is coming up with a way to not call themselves a security team. And so we've always suggested, or at least I've suggested, that they just simply come up with a different word, call themselves courtesy officers, call themselves staff. My particular favorite is call yourself the demon watchers, and I think that then you can pretty much do anything you want without being regulated.
Yeah, I've got my own thoughts on that too, and we'll probably get to it later. But my answer to that is just people just need to individually take responsibility for their safety and that of others. And if you do that and everybody's safe and situationally aware and takes responsibility for that, then you don't need that church security team so much. You just need ushers. But we'll get to that a little bit later and see what other people's opinions are. Don, did you have anything else you needed to hit? Because I know we pushed past the time where you said you need to bounce.
Yeah, no, nothing really. Actually, I'll probably be back if this is still going on in about 15, 20 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, no worries. You need to take a potty break?
No, I got another call. Sorry.
Okay, right on, man. Okay, hey, Matt, so getting back to the initial question that I gave Don there, security cameras and command centers, which I see some of the most ridiculous placements for their command centers where the screens are being viewed and things like that. What are your thoughts on what you look for with positioning for observation equipment, quality, what you're looking for, and positioning of the viewing room?
The first thing I look for is are the people trained in handling the cameras, and also the installation. Like you said, where's the footprint at? What is it covering? because they may throw a camera up there, but if there's limbs in the way, or if there's, for outside cameras, if they, again, like Carol mentioned, maintaining, the lawn care, the trimming of the trees, the bushes, and everything else. If you have stuff that's, in front of the cameras, me and Don did a church assessment over by where he lives there, and that's one of the problems we ran into, was that the cameras were being blocked. Majority of the outside cameras were being blocked by trees, by tree limbs and everything else. So the footprint is a big thing. Make sure it's clear, make sure that it is covering what it's supposed to be. And that's having someone stand out there, looking at the camera, having someone at the monitor, looking at the monitor, and make sure that it is covering that footprint. For entrance points, I would have one above, so that way it's looking down at them, and have it in another place that shows either a side profile or gets a better picture of the person. So I would have dual cameras watching every access point. For windows, I mean, every church has some kind of window, some kind of access point. I would have glass break sensors on there, so that way it goes back to the command center. And then also, once you're inside, I would definitely have a camera that would look at any access points, any doorways, hallways, especially if you come into an intersection, have a camera that does, multiple angles. And then tie it back. I know you said about the command center. The biggest thing that they have a problem with is trying to figure out where they want to put that, or they have no place to put it. They throw it in somebody's office. Well, anybody and everybody can look at that. It needs to be in a secure area where you have at least one or two, like Mr. Walker said, and having somebody watching the demon walkers there. Keeping an eye on them. So, I mean, and not only that, training the people on what to look for. So there is a lot of training. It's just, just put someone who you hired as security, throw them in front of the camera and say, all right, go ahead and observe. There's a lot more in there, what is this, how's this person, walking? Is he walking into the church with a full jacket when it's summer outside? That's a dead giveaway. They should be dressing for the occasion. So yeah, cameras are a big thing. The command center, I would definitely training. You need to have people that are trained for that to observe. Also having a good communications plan. And when I say communications plan, having that two-way radio, so that way and designated channels. So that way you can talk to your door guys, or have your door checks. Then you're going to have the people that are inside the church within the actual meeting place, having another channel for those guys. So you're going to have multiple channels for the security, and all depends, and it all goes to, just like Carol and everybody else has mentioned, the concentric rings of security. Just like you said, so you start as far out as possible, have those barriers, both natural and man-made, funneling people in using all the whether it's fences, gates, or the shrubbery, or whatever else you have, and being able to have those people control all those access points, and be able to overlook those access points. So also, Carol just brought up a good one, routine checks, being able to go through and having those routine checks of those cameras. Maybe it got knocked out during a hurricane or some bad weather. Some of the things we see on a lot of assessments is that lights are burned out, they're broken, they're not even hooked up properly. Same thing with cameras. They can get knocked out. They can get disconnected. So doing routine checks of those, and I think that pretty much covers it.
I think you hit it on the head. It's one of the things that is my pet peeves when I look at some of the way these churches are laid out, because you get contacted by these churches, and of course their number one focus is on the security team, which I think is completely backwards. But, and then when you go look at these places, they'll have not really a control room. They might have a viewing room that's up by the front entrance.
Yep.
When you said secure area, that's about right. I'd like to have those command centers in a secure area. And we could even get away from calling it a command center to a management center. If situational awareness and communication of information is critical. And for the majority of the people out in the church that are on the teams, not just the security team, but your parking lot attendants, your ushers, who a lot of them are on communications, on radios. You're having to communicate with words. But other than the person who's got eyes on the scene, the other person who gets to see pictures is the guy in that command center. And if you're near the entrance door where people are going to be poking their head in to talk to you, or you're going to be engaged in something going on, you're no longer commanding. You're no longer situational aware. You're getting sucked into one thing, and you're failing at the task of seeing the big picture and relaying things. And I see that all the time, when I run training events where everybody wants to rush to the crisis site. And they forget about everything else that's happening. You lose complete situational awareness of, everything else that's going on, and then you can't make logical decisions. So that's one of the things that I like to push is get that thing in a secure area where you can start sifting information. You can talk to your parking lot attendants. Maybe you see things that nobody else sees, and you can relay that information so it's not stovepiped in those areas. But yeah, get it in a secure area. It drives me nuts.
Yeah. Too many distractions. That's the big. There's too many distractions.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, appreciate that. Reagan, since you've been super quiet here, man, what do you view as the primary role of the church security team to be? And what would you assess their critical capabilities and competency levels should be?
Oh man, that's a heavy one. Let's see. The primary role of them to be is more proactive, really, and I don't know. I really should add a couple more minutes on that. Being proactive is really where I put them at, to be visible, not necessarily overt, like the law says, as the Senate bill was introduced. You can't wear something that says security and all this kind of garbage. Not really that, but from what you guys are talking about, parking lot attendants, ushers, that sort of thing. Being out there and being a presence is a visual deterrent to begin with on a lot of ways, but we also don't want to rely on that. So rely 100% on that. It's like someone saying, like posturing, racking a shotgun runs people away or runs the bad guy away. I don't rely on that. That's poor tactics. But as far as their primary role is to be eyes and ears and protectors, be able to communicate, and protect the flock. I mean, and when I say the flock, I also mean it's something that's kind of, for some reason, overlooked is like the nurseries. They're typically located away from the sanctuary, so you can't hear like babies crying, that sort of thing when you're trying to go through the word. So primary role is to be a solid member of the church and be an active protector. And that's the issue that I run into with hired security, is they don't fit that role for the most part, because they don't go there. They typically don't go there. That's something I see in my own personal church. And we've had some guys that are great, but then there's plenty of people who don't fit that role. And I'll step outside to do my own walkthrough, just on my own, not hired by the church. And I'll see them playing Candy Crush or that sort of thing on their phone. And that's a big, I'm talking to the hierarchy right then, after church about it, because they don't fit the role of protector and observer. I mean, because there's tons of other things that they could do. It doesn't necessarily have to be active shooter. There could be, when I was a younger man, there was one of the fuse boxes on the building exploded on one of the buildings I was in. And before any alarms could go off, they were communicating like, hey, something's going on. And then pulling the alarm, getting people out, managing people, being able to, while you're being the primary role of protector is the ability to manage the people. I may be getting off on a bullet point on that, but
no, you're fine.
But okay, but yeah, that's really true. That's really what I always want to come back to is like, hey, you got to be a protector. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean, hey, I'm a gun-toting bad boy. It's, I'm diligent. I'm focused, and that's one of the things I just can't stand when I see some of the hired security that we're seeing out of a company, or whether it be a off-duty police officer. We've had good and bad of both of those, and then straight up security company. It's like, if you're not there to be a protector, this is not where you need to be. So okay. Sorry, I may have gone off on a
No, appreciate that. And my personal views, and I'll see if I can get Matt's thoughts on my personal views here after I give them. Is that I see the church security team's primary role is specialized response and management. I actually don't buy off on their primary job is to protect the flock, because that's supposed to be everybody's job, especially when we talk about churches. We're not training people to be sheep. We're training people to be shepherds. We're training people to be disciplers. That's your job. That's the primary role of the church. So if you're sitting back and expecting other people to protect you, I think you're already off base scripturally, to be honest. And here's the other thing. This came up in, our John Mark's had to leave already, but this came up in our men's Bible study group that we have every Tuesday morning. And I kind of broke their hearts a little bit on this, because there's some false perceptions about what church security teams can do for you. And I asked the guys in the group, how many of those church security team guys do you see carrying things like this? A rifle. How often do you see that at churches? Doesn't happen, right? Because they're big and scary. I get it. Okay. So what do you see them carrying? Probably a concealed pistol. That's it. Probably doesn't even have a light on it. It's probably a compact. And then I asked the guys, like, what's the distance from side to side of the sanctuary? Because ours is 130 yards. And go back and think to yours. And then think back to your primary entry point, the foyer, from side to side, which is 70 yards. And then I asked guys, what's your ability to safely and accurately place rounds at those distances in a complex foreground and background? And the room usually gets real quiet. And I tell guys, you want to think about that. Like, you can do all the simunitions training in the world, and that's one of the reasons that I put this on, because guys get into a false sense of security about that and think just because a guy's got an earpiece and a pistol, unless he happens to be right at the place where that incident happens, your best chance is to have someone armed that can meet the trifecta that I like to throw out: the handle your weapon safely and competently, place rounds anatomically correct for incapacitating shots, and be able to target discriminate to be able to deal with that threat. Because if you think as a security member you're going to wade through the screaming, panicking masses of a sanctuary 130 yards to the other side to deal with that, you're kidding yourself. So I kind of take a little bit of a different approach to that, in that, the old Army adage of every soldier a sensor. Every congregation member should be a set of eyes and ears, just like I think Mr. Walker brought up with the shooter down in South Texas. Don brought that up with the social media. The guy was a weirdo, right? So what did people do? They unfriended him. Where does that fall into your job? You're supposed to be engaging people. If you see someone out of place in the church, there should be 100 people going up and talking to him, not like, what are you doing? Like, hey, my name's this, welcome to this area, bottom up, training a congregation, church security team. I see them as specialized response in management. That's my thoughts. Matt, what's your take?
Well, the big thing I see right now, that talking to some of the people that work on the security detail, they come off as an executive protection team more than anything, and that's the biggest thing. That's the biggest thing that I get, and it's like, and like being able to usher out the pastor, the padre, whoever. But you also have the threat that you have to take care of, and you also have the additional people and everything else in there. But the way I look at it, if they are going to be a security detail, they should be the first line of defense. They should be the one that should be able to take the fight to the attacker. And one, they have to be trained. They have to do it, weekly, if not daily, in their house, going through dry firing, magazine changes, working on their concealed, carry, So there is a lot of things that I see wrong with the security details that they have now. And like you said, the priority is wrong. It really is. They should be working on emergency planning and exfil plans. Designate what person is going to take what exits and how are they going to, get the people out of there. They're going to need someone to lead them out of that place. But there's also going to be people that need to stay there and make sure that the people are being, exfilled.
Yep.
So that's one of it. Another thing, maybe come up with a safe room. Designated safe room. I work with a lot of, both me and Carol both work with a lot of civilians. The last two houses were between 15,000 and 20,000 square foot. So it's same thing. And some of these guys have some really, really nice safe rooms, but we had to get them to that point. Mm-hmm. And, having additional monitors, like one person had a monitor that was in their kitchen, right offside their kitchen. And I was like, that's not a good place to have it, because mm-hmm. How are you going to monitor that when you're, in your safe room? So we had them develop a safe room, put in an additional monitor, and knowing what to have in there. So I think there's, like you said, they're concentrating too much on being, a security detail when they should be concentrating on emergency exfil. And that's my take on it.
I totally agree. Managing the masses is one of the big failings across the board. And I see that with SWAT teams. They'll want to practice, hitting the house, or doing hostage rescue and stuff like that. Then I'm like, okay, what's your post assault plan? Where's how are you setting that up? How are you doing that? It's the same thing with churches, and most of the ones that I talk to that approach me, and they want to talk about church security. I'm like, okay, when was the last time you did a fire drill with your congregation? And I get a blank stare. Yeah, I'm like, yeah. Well, that's basics, guys. What's more likely to occur, that you have a fire drill, or you turn into a little SWAT team, and deal with an active shooter at your church. Think about that. That's why I like to gravitate towards, like, hey, your specialized response, and management, as a security team. And it's simple things to do that churches can do that doesn't make it appear that you're training for an active shooter. Hey, I tell my pastor this. I've told him a couple times, like, hey, after a sermon, ask for volunteers to stay behind. Like, hey, we'd appreciate it if you could stay behind here, if you're willing to, for 10 minutes, and we want to do a live fire drill with everybody in the congregation, right? And figure out how to manage that. Integrate your command center. Which way are you going to evacuate people? Did you actually study the weather patterns to determine what critical piece of information you might want to know to figure out which way you want to evac from the building from? Which would be what, Reagan? Wind direction? Good job.
I was reading.
Right, but that's little things that should go into the daily planning, the daily brief, right? And do that type of training, because if you haven't done that, you're going to fail. It's like flight stewardesses. We talk about like aircraft assault and stuff like that. You send guys to flight stewardess school to go check out how they manage getting people off of a plane. That's one of the critical pieces of becoming a flight attendant. They have to pass, is managing getting people out of there, because dealing with panicked people, they're in a rush to save their lives, is something you're going to have to deal with. And then, oh, by the way, how are you going to manage your 1,000-person congregation screaming and trying to fight to go get their kids? And how are you going to manage the control of that release? But we want to talk about active shooter. Basics. It's all fundamentals and order of incidents. How they appear. What are any agreements, disagreements, Matt?
No, I completely agree with you. Another thing that I think they should, churches, their security team should look at is, one, individual training and collective training. And like you said early on, what is the end state? What are you, because are you going to have a SWAT team as your or executive protection team, or are you going to have guys that are going and women that are going to help with the exfil, help with the madness, have a designated person or people go after the shooter? Yeah. And how are you going to, again, you brought up a good point, how are you going to secure the children, if that's part of it? So there's a lot of factors I think they need to look at and plan for, besides just saying, okay, we go to the range, we shoot, that's it. Okay, we're now security detail. There's way more than there really is.
I wanted to kind of use this into a segue to Mr. Walker here, because I think we've been neglecting him. And one of the specialized responses that I see that church security teams serve as a primary role, other than hopefully having a senior guy in that command center with some sort of tactical sense that can make decisions, which I don't see happen either, is interfacing with local law enforcement. Basically being their quartering party, being their guides, bringing them in, since they'll have additional situational awareness, and being on comms and knowing where people and things are happening to effectively guide in law enforcement. Because as civilian use of force, one of our biggest concerns is anytime you pull out a gun in self-defense is how you are perceived by others in law enforcement, right? So, Mr. Walker, could you give us some thoughts, on the legal side with interactions with law enforcement in use of force or critical incident sites?
Well, obviously, you want to train everybody to, call 911 in the event that there is, an incident, and it can be, you're right, it doesn't have to be a massive shooter incident. It could be a crazy person in the parking lot who is, damaging vehicles or, what have you. And basically tell them, who you are, where the situation is, what exactly is happening, what crime is occurring. And then, of course, if there is a good guy in the area, describe the individual who is not to be scrutinized, as well as describing the individual who is. So if you're on, if you're a spectator and you have 911, you say, well, we've got a member of our congregation who's already engaged him. The perpetrator is dressed like this, but the person who's engaged him is dressed like this. And obviously, once the police show up, everybody should be trained to immediately show the police officer their hands. Show them your hands to make sure that the police officer knows that you are not the threat. Make sure that you're not perceived as the threat. And otherwise, follow their directions.
Yeah, it's great. Now, and I'm glad you said that because you actually reinforced my point about one of the primary roles for security team is is to be that quartering party, because all the things you're talking about that you want to get relayed to law enforcement, where are your good guys? What are they doing? What are they wearing? Where are they located? What actions are taking place? Who's got best visibility and ability to communicate that? Your security team. It's not rocket science. So that's one of the things that I like to kind of tell security teams to get their heads wrapped around. And these are things that you can rehearse without anybody knowing about it. You can do things that like lifeguards do, which they call red hat drills, where if you get a guy with a red hat that jumps in the pool, they go rescue him. It's kind of a training event. You can do things like that in a church, not actually like tackling somebody, but practicing observing, controlling, and managing just by somebody wearing a visual cue that's a code that they know it's a training event, but start a tracking and management exercise where you kind of go through those steps on the radio and do that chess play and kind of do things like that. So I'm kind of glad you said that. So I'm just going to hit a couple more of these topics that we have here, since we've been pushing a little bit late here, and then move right into the Q&A. And I know we're going to be missing things. We don't have enough time to cover everything, with regards to this, but we'll try to manage through it. And then guys that need to leave, they can leave here. We do want to talk emergency action plans. Right. And a lot of this goes to prioritization. So, Matt, when we talk about emergency action plans, plans for emergencies that churches put in place, and I'm sure you're already there with me. What are your thoughts, number one, on how churches perceive those priorities when they approach you, and then how you perceive the priorities when you discuss with them about training plans?
Well, you're absolutely right. First thing, I ask the client, what is their threat, and usually it's from someone who is on Facebook or social media that is out there throwing threats towards the pastor or the church. That's usually the big threat right there. Active shooter comes up as number one, just because it's out there having a lone wolf attack. That's usually top of the list. Some things I tell them that they need to do is it's almost like developing a pattern of life. They know the followers, and they know the people that come to church every Sunday or whenever they have church services. Start identifying the new people that show up. Look at them, start getting an idea. Get to know them, and develop. It's not profiling; it's developing the pattern of life. It's developing that situation. It's situational awareness. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's that's one of the biggest things I see. And then what I do is it all comes down to training.
Yeah.
And like I said before, knowing the individual training, knowing the collective training, knowing the end state, and then coming somewhere and meeting, in the middle with them. Because a lot of times the client doesn't really know what they want. They just know there's a threat, a perceived threat, and they're trying to figure out how to delay the onset or how to react to it.
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
I hope that covers something.
That was great. And I wanted to hit on something that we just saw on the chat channel here, about stress and how to deal with that. And my answer to you is fundamentals. It's fundamentals. It's not getting out with someone screaming at you or trying to artificially induce stress. You have to have a solid base of fundamentals. In the special operations world where I went, we had the luxury of spending an inordinate amount of time training on basic fundamentals. I didn't have to have someone yelling and screaming at me. The training was hard enough with regards to the fundamentals, right? So a lot of people have a different take on, when training's hard. How do we make training hard? How do we make it stressful? You make the standard stressful with regards to fundamentals. And then, those stressful situations will be a lot easier. You've got ability to problem solve, right? Reagan, thoughts on prioritizing emergency action plans?
There we go. Prioritizing emergency action plans. That's one of the things that I went over with the church this yesterday evening, and it was the same deal that kind of like we were running into. They saw themselves kind of a little bit different, and that they wanted to. They're like, all right, we want to learn to do this and this and shoot. And when I brought up the same thing you were just talking about, I was like, hey, when's fire drill? You guys got a fire plan? And they're like, well, yeah, but what's that got to do with it? Really and truly, the first thing I want them to do is learn how to manage those people. You got ushers, you got parking lot attendants, and especially, when it does start, when they do get that done, then I'm like, all right, now protecting the nurseries, cry rooms. My church actually has 3 separate buildings, basically all kind of halfway joined together. I'm like, you've got to be able to get and link up with these people. It's not just the guys in the congregation that you're watching out for. So prioritizing is, for me, what I would suggest is, a lot of fire departments come in for free if you don't have a fire evacuation plan, and do that. And then really, most of what you need to do is, for an active shooter situation, is to move your collection points further out, establish communications better with law enforcement, because you're the ones going to be calling them. The fire alarm's not going to be the thing calling them. And then from that point on, which they need that stuff in place. And after that, it's, I'm going to say, if you want to do the firearms training and the obviously situational awareness medical training is, I'm conflicted as to where to throw that in. It can go all the way to the beginning, especially if you're, like you say, gun-free zone. You better get that medical training in there right now, because that's going to be an issue. Yeah. So, managing, the fire evacuation plan, medical, and then, later on, it becomes the firearms training, the not executive protection, because I keep getting like you say, a lot of those guys want to do that, just like Matthew was saying. Yep. They're like, oh, I want to learn. Oh, we need to learn how to clear rooms. I'm like, no, we're not. You're not even close to there yet. You've got a lot of building blocks, and then obviously the physical security. When it comes to prioritizing that sort of thing, a lot of the churches that I've dealt with have actually already had things like that and had no idea why they had holly bushes in front of the nursery windows. When she pointed that out, I was like, man, that's a good point that I didn't even bring up. So,
but wait, you're saying if they've done 5 weeks of simunition training for CQB, they're not ready for CQB? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Oh, yes. So, yeah.
I'm right there with you, man. And I take that same approach. It's always the basics, and everyone's steered towards that fear, of active shooter, this or that. Man, you need to think. You need to think more on the basic level. Hey, your fire plan. What about your weather plan? Lightning strikes and things like that. Cardiac event. You got a bunch of senior citizens there. How are you going to handle that? If you have somebody that has a heart attack in the middle of a service, how do you handle managing the people? Where's that? And that's usually never talked about. It's always basics. So I kind of want to segue into one more good point, a general point, and then what I'll have us do is we can take a quick break so you guys can hit the bathroom, and then people that want to stay for the Q&A. Reagan's like, yes, can stay for the Q&A. If you've got a cut free, that's fine. But I do want to hit this one final point here is when we're looking at a layered approach to security, and you guys that are still with us, we've lost 5, not too bad. You probably noticed that we haven't talked a whole lot about guns and weapons training. It's a layered and fundamentals based thing that we need to do. So when we look at that layered approach to security and safety, we'll go to Reagan first, and then over to Matt and Carol here. How do you take a holistic approach to integrating all layers of church personnel, from pastor to greeter, into being a prepared organization?
How I take a holistic approach.
Holistic means using all of the organic parts to. If you need to Google that,
I have Google. All right. Yes, taking the holistic approach. It's finding, like, basically when I talk to these people and we get them all in the area, I'm like, as many people who are willing and able to be a part of the reaction plan for anything with the church is to find work. Like, if you can't, if I've got another gentleman that I just talked to yesterday who was like was looking to be part of the security portion, but he's like, hey, I have arthritis, this and the other, and I'm like, you have work to do. There's plenty of other things that you need to be doing. I like the pastor. I mean, one of the things that I've seen in some of the books that I've read about, even like emergency management, like Rick Rescorla during the 9/11 attack, was actually guiding people down the stairs the entire time in this big, loud yet somewhat calming baritone voice. And like, the pastor at that point, if during anything, can be on, not the loudspeaker, but on the PA system talking, or the just the system that he normally speaks through talking, keeping people calm, moving up, getting them to move calmly in certain areas, depending on what the situation is. And even the parking lot attendants can have, there's plenty of things for them to start managing, just making sure that everybody has a job that they can simply connect to in their mind, that this is what I'm supposed to do, to fall back on. I don't know if that actually answered your question, but in the holistic approach, I'm like, I want everybody has a job to do. And especially when comms fail, you want those people to run and do their job, like anything they can. And even if their position isn't needed necessarily, to be able to fill in with other areas. And that doesn't even include the security team or the guys toting guns, as much as just being an active part of the church. I'm not sure if that answered you correctly. Sorry.
I'm not sure if it did or not, but we'll have Matt comment on it.
Okay, so the way we use the holistic approach is assessments. We do both exterior and interior assessments. We both wrote our little notes here and everything. Basically, I'm looking at concentric circles. If you're looking at security, so concentric circles being, lighting, cameras, natural man-made barriers, starting out, and then making your way in, and that's the outer ring, making your way into the middle ring, which you may have to have security patrols. You may have, if you're monitoring social media, or if you are receiving threats, a church is receiving threats, or there is a high level of possibility, then you may have to have patrols, may have to have, law enforcement come in. Then the other one is the inner ring, your security details, your cameras, your designated areas, your safe rooms, your command center. So it does. It comes for us, for Scenic 360 and SOC group. We use assessments, and those vulnerability assessments, physical, penetrations, any of that. It's taking what they have, their structure, their personnel, everything else in there, and using what they have already there for them. And Carol's got some good notes on the holistic part of it too. Go ahead.
Yeah, just looking at the layer effect, like I had spoken about earlier, moving pretty much from the perimeter of the property to the middle ground and exterior of the building, and then again, then Matt's company takes over and they move from the walls in and looking at the security from within the building, and then looking at that as far as getting, the within that building, then you also have the congregation and the pastor and the people, and training them and getting them involved. I think the big thing is, and not necessarily training as far as, CQB and all that, close quarter battle, whatever, but just getting them training them in situation awareness and knowing what to look for, and threat or friendly as far as people and that type of thing, and really that encompasses everything, just moving from the exterior all the way to the interior and getting everyone involved.
I couldn't agree with you more. When you're starting at the basics, and people blow this off because, again, we're all focused on the church security team. One of the basic interactions that everybody has, from pastor to security team to greeter, is how you interact with people. You're supposed to be approaching people and greeting them, so you should know what to look for with somebody's demeanor. Number one, to steer the conversation. Number one, you should be doing a quick visual assessment of them to kind of steer how you're going to approach that person, based off of their clothes, which could, give you an idea of what kind of generational type conversation you may want to give, or, whatever. But that also feeds into training people to recognize threats, recognize body, demeanor and things like that. And that's got to be pushed out to the outer ring. It should start in the parking lots, because it's not about responding to things faster. It's responding to things sooner. And the only way to do that is to push out that perception bubble, where you recognize threats and how you can respond to them. Absolutely. Matt, did you have something you want to add, or did I actually say?
I did. And also, I know we keep talking about, about the security detail, the training they need and everything else. Actually, there's two types of training. You have training for the security detail, and they wear hats, but you also have the churchgoers too. I mean, you can, the church can have, they can put on, stop the bleed classes. They can have first aid classes. They could have some basic situational awareness classes. I mean, so you're training the masses. It's just like, in special force multiplier. Use that pastor, as a force multiplier.
Yep.
Train his flock, to take care of themselves and also the people around them.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of focusing on the congregation over the church security team. So much so that I've actually offered to the pastor's men's Bible study that I go to Tuesday mornings, that I'll run a training course for him for free, because I'd rather have 100 mildly competent people in a church rather than 6 supremely competent people. I need, you're carrying pistols. You're not carrying rifles. If you think you're making a 130-yard shot across no, it's not happening. Mr. Walker, I wanted to give you one follow-up here before we take a quick bathroom intermission and roll into the Q&A here. To ask you what kind of legal considerations may a church have with that kind of holistic integration? To what limitations of ages can be integrated into their security plan, distances with regards to property line, how far out in the parking lots we're getting into, and capacities they operate, and then anything else you'd like to add from a legal standpoint before we move into the Q&A.
Well, I think I touched on it earlier, that there, with regard to legal concerns, fortunately, here in Texas, there's not a whole lot of legal concerns that they ought to keep in, that they need to be aware of, with regard to what could potentially get the church in trouble. There's really not much. Certainly, everybody who, if they're going to, they should obviously encourage the members to attend these meetings, to get this training, and to know what the law is. and specifically with regard to the law of when you can and can use deadly force. I think that certainly, and which we've done this in the past, we've gone to churches and we've talked to members who are concerned about when, what is reasonable use of force, when can the situations can you use deadly force, because certainly I know that one of the concerns they should have is making sure that all of their members, if they're going to allow the license holders to carry, if they've decided that they want to have a specialized group of people that have more of a responsibility for keeping the members safe, that they want them to know what the law is with regard to all the laws regarding justification as to when that they can properly use force and deadly force. They don't want to have somebody using deadly force against somebody who is just simply out vandalizing automobiles. That's not a crime for which you can use deadly force. But obviously, if somebody enters the sanctuary with a firearm, and they've done so in an unlawful enforcement manner, then you can use deadly force. So I think that that's what they would want their members to be educated with.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And just to kind of close this out before we take our quick bathroom intermission here and then do the Q&A. And I know we've covered things for the audience here generally, which actually is a good thing. Maybe we'll get the SMEs to review this footage and see if it's actually going to be appropriate to post on the internet, because we haven't gotten too specific in the tactics. But one thing you'll notice, like it's a broken record. We keep talking about basic fundamentals. It's basic fundamentals. Everybody wants to do collective tasks. And one of our viewers, Eric Soderlund, just posted a link, and it's from the government. It's a .gov. It's until help arrives. And if you read the PDF in there, it's all collective training. And that's what everyone wants to focus on. They want a big collective training event. The government's good at that. A lot of outfits are good at these big events. They're fun. You feel like you've done a lot. But if you haven't taken the time to focus on individual fundamentals, you're really not that effective just because you've ticked the block and gone to one of these courses. So I don't want, listeners here an hour later to look at this and like, well, they didn't cover anything specifically. Well, yeah, we did. We told you to focus on fundamentals. Quit worrying about these big collective events. If you know how to do individual tasks really well, to possibly even to an expert level, you will be more effective at collective tasks than someone who's trained to the expert level at collective tasks but has had minimal training in the basics and fundamentals. Because that's what you're going to have to do when you actually get into stressful situations, which training events and collective training courses really can't replicate. They just won't, right? Does anyone else have anything to add before we hit the bathroom here? You guys good? All right, so what I'd like to do here is let's take a quick 5-minute intermission, and we'll come back here and we'll take whatever questions. Now, if any of the panelists, you guys have to hit the road, you can do your peace out, now if you want to. If not, we can come back here and do the Q&A. And like I said, I will be putting out an email with everybody's contact info, kind of a summary, so that listeners and viewers can contact each one of the panelists here individually for training or services. Going once, going twice. All right, 5 minutes. So I think we got a couple more minutes here on that 5-minute intermission. But at this time, we'll move into the question and answer when Matt and everyone else gets back here. So when we go into this, you're free to either unmute yourself and ask questions verbally. Oh, Don's back. Okay, so you can unmute and ask questions verbally, or you can type in your question, whichever one you prefer. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and get started here. Now, Matt and Carol, they can be here for another 10 to 15 minutes. So
yes, about 15 minutes.
Yeah, so if anyone here has specific questions with regards to physical security, locks, cameras, landscaping, access points, things like that, try to hit those up first. All right, so the floor is open. Nobody go at once. I had one person muted. I just went and unmuted you. If you don't know how to unmute yourself, it's that little microphone button. Everybody that comes in by default is muted. So you've got to actually unmute yourself to be able to talk if you're trying to actually speak.
Here, there was a couple questions I saw. Like one person was asking about how to overcome fear.
Yeah.
Do you want to address something like that? I know we touched on the concentric rings of security, but somebody was asking about fear. I typed in earlier that through repetition, through training, through the basics and everything else, that will help overcome that. And then I saw someone else write in, but due to there's got to be an induction of stress. I know you covered that.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of stress inoculation, but not just externally, but through self-awareness, right? Because I'm not a psychologist, but I've known a few, and we're all different, and I think, it kind of has a scriptural standpoint too, when you get into uncomfortable areas in scripture like death, and how do you deal with that? And the answer is, from a scriptural standpoint, if you're going to engage into that, is you have to prepare yourself for it. You have to contemplate how that conversation is going to go, and you have to come up with a basis for it, what your standpoint is going to be, and things like that. And I think that same approach is applicable to use of force situations or traumatic situations, because what is post-traumatic stress? It's literally shock, right? It's your body and mind, it's your mind seeing, smelling, touching something that it's not able to compute, and it induces traumatic shock. So how do you overcome that? By contemplating, thinking about that, trying to desensitize yourselves to things, and contemplate, the possibility of what could happen. At least that's my take on it.
I think you're right. Just with through repetition, through training, through having that, your body actually kicks into falling back on what you're trained, and receiving proper training. Don't just take it from whoever. Because there's a big difference between law enforcement and military, how we see things. So there's look at who you want and look at their background and go from there.
Yeah, and I'm a big one who. Yeah, you got a question there.
Yep. Let's see. So Craig asked, what is your thought on having electric locks with card or a fob? It's secured. That's fine, but you got to remember too that with electric locks and having a fob, that it's limited to the access, and those are the points I think that you would want for your command center, your offices. things that want to be secured in nature and keep other people away from it. So those having the electric locks are good for that. Your other access points, I would probably stick with just the normal locking mechanisms. Because if you start dealing with fobs, somebody loses a fob, now you have to go in and you have to change those, just like a key. If you lose a key, you're going to have to go in. You're going to have hopefully have an interchangeable cord that you go ahead and pull that out, stick a new one in, recut the keys, hand those out, and then you've got to have someone who can maintain control of the keys and who gets access. And so you got to look at where you want to put your electric locks and your fobs. So that's hopefully that answers your question there.
Sure. Then you had another one there about what the thoughts on types of doors. Oh, nope, that wasn't it. It was weak points of a structure from an exterior perspective. Anything you could do that might mitigate those weaknesses.
They do make some door. Well, okay. First of all, churches. A lot of the churches I've seen already have like a lot of it's stone, a lot of it's the mason. The doors are already built in there. If you have glass doors, or if you have glass doors or glass panels on it, they make material that you can actually put over those that will mitigate someone breaking in. It's almost like it's almost like shatterproof. It's something that will buy you time and also deter people from breaking in. Anybody else on structures there, weak points? If you do have a weak point, identify it. If there's nothing you can do to build it up, definitely increase the lighting, increase the cameras. Make sure that that's maybe possibly something that you have manned. Have a checkpoint there within there. Those are just some things you can do without having to rip out the door and put a whole new door in there. Because a lot of churches I know, when me and Don did the assessment, they really didn't want to spend a lot of money on upgrading things. So we had to look at other resources and other ways of increasing their security without it being on the super expensive end, but yet, giving them an answer and a solution that they can use and implement as soon as possible.
Yeah.
So,
and Matthew, one thing.
Go ahead, Don. Reagan, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
One of the things on doors that you were talking about the types of glass and stuff that won't shatter and the coatings on it. One of the things that we did when I was I was a child, a very young man, we had doors at our church and they were just the clear glass. And we actually had a very young lady run towards the door and put her hand through the door. It cut her artery in her arm and it started spraying blood everywhere. It was very eye-opening. One of the things that we did to mitigate that, or they did, I was too young, was they used the I forget what it's called, the metal mesh glass. But one of the things that has always stuck with me is they actually had little metal bars made that were actually matched to the same finish as the door, and they were bolted on and they made to look nice. But it was one of the things that they were sold on is like, if someone comes to kick that glass out, now they're going to have to crawl over the top of the push bar that's there for adults. So it was like little push bars for kids, but it was also a little extra layer of security, because if they want in, they're going to climb over the top versus just going under like you see in convenience stores where they bust out the bottom and climb through. I just saw that or heard that, was like, oh, look at that. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the important things to do with regards to that question that was asked about reinforcing external structures is try to figure out what you want to do first, because there's two approaches. Obviously, there's the visual deterrent, making that door look harder than the door next to it to get somebody to move somewhere else, or same thing with where you do with your house. Or what are you trying to protect against? Which usually we're talking about like how long, that speed bump's going to last, because that's what all those security measures are, speed bumps. How long do I want to be able to hold somebody out reasonably, right? Because if you want to actually completely keep someone out, like Matt, who's could just show up with an exothermic torch and cut the door open, that's what you want to think about, and it's a time versus money versus what you're reasonably trying to accomplish, but there's simple things to do that these guys have talked about here. Let's see, I think we had did we have another physical security?
What are the thoughts?
Locking out the threat as it presents itself. Cover and concealment. This is what I like about Matt. So let's talk about that for a minute. When you go to churches, how many walls and doors do you encounter that have little stamps and stickers on them that show their National Institute for Justice ballistic rating form?
Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they do make doors or attachments for doors that are supposed to lock people out and all that.
Yep.
But you got to remember too, when you have that many people within the church, when do you lock that door? Because now you have half the people in, half people out. That's what we were talking about. Safe rooms. If you have a safe room, it's something that you control from the inside, but it's also a layered approach. Whenever we develop a safe room, we have a 3-door approach. So that way there's actually security, layered security within the security realm before you get to the safe room. So the way we would look at that and, locking out the threat, if you're looking at the actual locking out of the threat, you would have to have that single safe room that everybody can get to. But there's also got to be, again, like we said, there's, the security detail isn't just there for the pastor. They're there for everybody else.
Yeah.
So if you're going to have that as we, push, Carol and myself push the assessments and the safe rooms, we have a, like I said, 3-door approach. You're going to have those manned by those security details. And they're the ones who are going to be the last line of defense to make sure everybody's through, lock that door, continue moving to that secondary, wait until they pass through the last man, last woman, last child, lock that door, move on to the next one. So it's the thoughts for me for a lockout, it's 50-50. They're good, but at the same time, you're leaving someone out in the cold. So unless somebody else has something else they want to add to it, or agree, disagree, please step in.
And I agree with you, and that's also one of the reasons I don't like to focus on the security team by itself. The congregation and lowest levels, the answer. Like my church, we're talking about like 20 exterior access doors. I'd have to have a 20-man security detail just to man and lock out all those doors by itself. Like, it's not going to happen, to be quite honest. So leveraging those lower, I don't want to say lower guys, but, guys that are doing the greeting and things like that and training them how to go through those procedures on your emergency action plan is supremely critical. Any other thoughts there? Travis, would you consider the kids' Sunday school area a place to concentrate this thought? What thought? I'm guessing like the lockout and everything. Matt, I don't know about you, but a lot of the places I've seen, the kids' area is not placed with a thought to any kind of security plan. What I've seen. It's usually kind of an afterthought or an add-on, and they produce some really interesting security problems.
They do. And matter of fact, me and Don, we'll just take that church that we worked on. You had an access that the door was broken for forever and a day, and people could come and go. And not only was it a problem, but they used to have homeless people sleeping there by the doors.
Yeah.
So now you have homeless people that are right outside there. They're breaking in there so they can get out of the cold. The children are there during the day. So I mean, that does pose a problem. So I would have to. It's one of those things. I wish I could say yes, I think that's great, or no. it's one of those things that you need to have someone come in and do an assessment of the facility, because you may have it may be one small church. It may be like we have around here in Franklin, Tennessee, and we have them that they look like universities. I mean, churches that are huge. I never would have thought they were churches, but they're unbelievably huge, and there's multiple buildings to it. So it's one of those things that you may have to have several safe rooms or several safe areas and multiple exfil plans and egress plans and emergency plans, not only just for one place, but for all of them. So that's why I recommend to everybody who's listening, have someone who's qualified come in and do a vulnerability assessment on the area. And not only that, but if it's an infrastructure that's been there for a while, that's a mature site, I would recommend having somebody come in and do a penetration test on those. Check out the locks, check out the cameras, check out everything on there. And not just physical, but also, using, like say Don here, having someone do an IT, test of that. So there's multiple layers to those security.
I'll tell you, Matt, you brought up a really good vetting point, because I've run into a lot of churches who have had a security assessment, and I don't know what they did, but they sure did miss a lot. And one thing that I would suggest, do exactly what Matt's telling you. Get an assessment, but make sure they are capable of and will do a red team first. Do a pen test first. If they don't know how to do a pen test, if they don't know how to do a red team, if they can't, actually attempt to gain access or do things without looking like a bunch of jackalopes, then you probably don't need to have them into your church to tell you where to put cameras and locks and things like that, because that's the mark of a professional that you're bringing in to do an assessment versus some guy who just went to the Texas State Security Commission and got his license, and now he's selling cameras and is going to come and tell you where to put. A guy with that kind of experience will know how to do a pen test, will know how to get access and placement, know what he's looking at, and be able to exploit vulnerabilities. Look, that would be my advice, is to look for that. Don, I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, I would agree completely, because the concepts are the same, whether it's physical security or IT security. Using a red team to gain access, that will definitely help in discovering where those vulnerabilities are and how to remediate those vulnerabilities.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any other questions? We got 26 people still in here. I said we'd do a Q&A, and I know we couldn't have possibly answered everybody's questions. Well, maybe we have. All right. Well, on the panelists here, is there anything that anyone else would like to add to everything we've talked about?
No, I just think like I said, as a recap, one, everybody needs to look at individual and collective training together, not just collective like you've hit upon every time, Eric. Mm-hmm. Everybody does the big sexy work. You have to do the trench, getting in the trenches, doing the individual stuff first, and then coming together. And that's like we talked about. You have to have some kind of gate system built in there. Start from here, go to the next one. Once you meet this gate, then there's the rest of the training, and it builds. You start from the basics and build from there. Have assessments done, have pen tests done, have the church, throw classes for the masses, so that way, individual, whether it's a situational class, whether it's a self-defense, whether it's a medical class, which I highly recommend. So there's a lot of stuff that I think I just wanted to recap everything we saw there, that we talked about, because we covered a lot of stuff that I think we definitely need to, individual first and then build from there.
Yep. Don?
I just want to state, because I work with a lot of businesses, of course, just like everybody else does, and making sure that you budget properly for good quality assessments, training, if need be, products and services. It's easy to state that, we're a church and we have a limited budget, and I get that, right? And every other, just like every other business, right? There's limits, right? But certainly be prepared, and you can save some costs in some areas, but there's some areas where you really shouldn't skimp on, and really making sure that you have a good plan, a security program in place, and that you have proper buy-in from leadership is vital for a successful security program.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Walker?
I just want to thank you for inviting me to participate here. It's been a good talk, a lot of great information. I'm glad that it kept going back to knowing the fundamentals, because that's extremely important. I mean, this sounds just like sports. The best athletes know the fundamentals, mm-hmm. and that's important. And one of the fundamentals you should know is know the law, know what you're legally allowed to do, know what's prohibited, and you can keep yourself out of a lot of trouble. And so that's, like I said, that's one of the primary services that we offer at Texas Law Shield. So anybody who's interested can find out more at Texas Law Shield or uslawshield.com.
Yep. And just to be clear, you guys do have a national, you're not just Texas, you're also national as well.
That is correct. Yeah, uslawshield.com.
Excellent. And I'll be getting with you to make sure that I put your information in the summary email we send out as well. Regan?
Well, thank you guys for inviting me to be on the panel. Next time I'll understand my questions a little bit better when I talk back to you guys. One of the big things that I've run into that I wanted to bring up was like the problems that I've run into with churches. I was asked what was the biggest one that I run into. Like, what's their biggest obstacle? And typically it becomes complacency. This has never happened to us before. We're in the middle of nowhere, blah, blah, blah. We don't need security cameras because we've got a security guard. We don't need a security evaluation because of, X, Y, and Z. And then, I'm still even seeing it after tragedies like this, that is, the reason we brought this whole thing together. And directly in my field, it's, guys who are, I shot a long time ago. I was a law enforcement officer. I grew up shooting. I don't need that training. You take everybody else and go do that training, and not willing to get on the same page, just absolute complacency. So, my goal with him is to, step outside of your own ego, step outside of what you think, and listen to some of the professionals out there, not just me, but we got a panel of guys here that are all professionals in their field, and ladies who are professionals in their field. That you need to just step outside and pay attention. You don't have to take everybody's advice, but not listening to it is borderline criminal when it comes to this sort of thing. So, but also I did want to say thank you to Eric Dorenbush for putting this all together and heading it up. It's we had a good turnout and got a lot of good solid dudes and people here to give out advice, and it wouldn't have happened if you hadn't started the whole thing.
I was trying to be part of the solution, and we'll review this. Maybe there'll be some flexibility for posting this. I'm not sure yet. And last but not least, Carol.
Just wanted to thank you for having me on the panel also, and hopefully everyone learned a little bit different perspective on security from me with using some landscape in the security. It's not just, fluff or a luxury. It actually can be beneficial in protection. And that's it.
No, absolutely. Carol's right on, and that's, I was really interested in, hearing what she had to say, because, I'd actually never heard of a landscaper actually getting involved in this. Like usually we do security assessments, we'll talk about, doing stuff like that, but not actually a professional landscaper with that kind of point of view doing that stuff. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I appreciate that. So just to summarize here, guys, I want to thank the panelists and everybody coming on and the attendees. And I just wanted to reinforce, you guys may have been coming, expecting to hear a to Z plan, to take away. And I'm telling you, it's going to be different for each and every organization. You have to do a needs assessment. You have to know your end state. You need to start with the fundamentals, the things that you do every day with an eye towards the end state where you want to be, towards those specialized responses to make sure that they flow evenly. And you need to focus on every member of the congregation. So my task to the attendees that are still here with us, here's your plan for next Sunday. It's to do your job as a Christian. It's to look at people around you, to talk to them, to get out there. You'll wind up being a censor for your church, right? You'll be eyes and ears. I task you to, when you walk into that sanctuary, to look around. And if you see somebody you've never seen before, go up and talk to them. Spend 5 minutes getting to know them. If everybody in your church did that, you would make huge inroads to being a safer place. Not that we do safe spaces, but be a safer place, right? Much more safe than you'd be if we, took a SEAL team in and did, 5 days of simunitions training with you. Be alert, be situationally aware, get engaged, do your job as a Christian. That's my thoughts. With that, I want to thank everybody. Again, we'll be sending out a summary email, so I'll be linking up with the panelists to make sure I get contact information and things like that. And you should see that sometime here this week. And I thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it.
Guys,
And thanks everyone else.
Nice reference to the SEAL team, too.
I saw your hair gel.
Yeah.